Welcome back to the Physics of Faith podcast. I'm Tim.
I'm Tommy.
And we are still in 1 Peter. So this is going to be 1 Peter chapter 5. We just did 1 Peter chapter 4, in which we discuss how Tommy is better than everyone.
Yep.
Yeah, that's exactly what. No, again, we hope you go back and listen and know that these are jokes. That we said the opposite in those particular episodes. But if you missed, obviously, we started with 1 Peter 1. We go all the way through 1 Peter 5. So if you've missed any of these, I do recommend go back to the beginning and start there. But today we're going to be reading 1 Peter chapter 5. Anything you want to say before we get started, Tommy?
I don't think so.
All right. Well, why don't we get right to the word? I am reading from New American Standard. I know Tommy is in NIV, and hopefully you're in something that you're comfortable with at home. All right. So chapter 5, verse 1 through verse 5. Therefore, I urge elders among you, as your fellow elder and a witness of the sufferings of Christ, and one who is also a fellow partaker of the glory that is to be revealed, shepherd the flock of God among you, exercising oversight, not under compulsion, but voluntarily, according to the will of God, and not with greed, but with eagerness. Nor yet as domineering over those assigned to your care, but by proving to be examples to the flock. And when the chief shepherd appears, you will receive the unfading crown of glory. You younger men, likewise, be subject to your elders, and all of you clothe yourselves with humility toward one another, because God is opposed to the proud, but he gives grace to the humble. That's a favorite one of mine.
Yeah.
And that actually is a Proverbs 3:34. Mm-hmm. He is quoting that there. So Peter starts here in chapter 5 again with therefore. So,
well, it's all, whenever you see therefore, that's like pay attention, because we're going to drop some knowledge, whether it be Jesus or Paul or Peter or whoever. When you see it therefore, I remember somebody said, studying the Bible is understanding what the therefore is there for.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's often the practical application of what came before. So it's a great realization that you need to not read necessarily with chapters and verse, but read to what it's saying.
Yeah.
So everything that we've said up to this leads to this, therefore, and he starts with urging elders on how to behave.
And you know why you talk about, obviously, I think we've talked about this before, the chapters are chapters and verse are there for us to be able to find it easier. Not necessarily. Sometimes it's in the middle of thought, but oddly enough, chapter 4 begins with therefore. At least in my version. I don't know if it does in yours.
Chapter 3, I believe, also. I think if you go back to chapter 3, it also begins with a reference to what happened before, and we talked about that in chapter 3 because chapter 3 starts with therefore, and then immediately talks about how women should be submitted to their husbands. Right. I don't know if submitted was the term that we used, but it started with an S. But it was likening that unto the things that it had previously talked about with being in submission to the local government and things like that. So again, every time we see this, we understand that it is a complete story, not compartmentalized. Right. Yes, so he's urging the elders, and he is also a fellow elder. I think at this point he's near the end of his life as he's writing this. And he is a witness of the sufferings of Christ, so he kind of throws that in there. He was there when Jesus was crucified. Mm-hmm. But he's telling elders how to behave, and he instructs them in their oversight to use volunteers, not compulsionary tactics, which I think was interesting because I think really what he's saying in oversight is not to manipulate people or to try to use your positions of authority to force them into something, but instead show them what is true, and they should volunteer. They should come to that conclusion on their own.
Yeah, there's a difference between there's a difference between shepherding and lording authority over it.
Right,
So he talks
absolutely.
about, be shepherds of, and this is super important that, so I'm one of the elders here at Southside, and this is something we always remember. Shepherds of God's flock that is under your care.
Yes.
These are God's children. They're not my children. Now I have children that I get to say, what to do and what not to do, that they have to submit to my authority as their father.
Right.
But I am not other people in the church. I'm not their dad. God is. But
Right.
I have a duty as a leader, as a shepherd of the flock to lead, to guide, to be an example to, because shepherds, when you it's the shepherd and the flock analogy is sometimes hard for us because we don't see a lot of shepherds and flocks now in the
Right.
21st century. But back then it was a very common analogy that you see very often, that Jesus was the shepherd, but he was also and so shepherd, they didn't use whips, they weren't like cowboys with cattle on horses, like they're shooting their gun and make them go that way. Like sheep are kind of dumb and they're kind of slow and they just kind of follow whatever's going ahead of them. And so the shepherd, he guides them. He he doesn't beat them with the staff. He uses the staff to pick if they fell off a cliff, it's got a hook on it to pull them or to guide them. But he doesn't. It's more of it's a nudging, not a whipping. And go this way, do what I say.
As you compare it to, say, more modern American animal farming and kind of how those animals are treated,
Yeah,
like to provide the outcome that we wanted, which was to either get their wool or to get their milk or to get their bacon,
Right.
whatever it might be, whatever it might be. Like you see that there's some very interesting tactics that are used to basically just force these animals to do these things, right?
Yeah.
And so when he's talking about shepherding, he's talking much more about what you're saying about the guidance and the direction, not domineering somebody or putting them in a box
Yeah.
to say this is what you're going to do because I'm in charge.
Yeah.
I think it's safe to say that too, as an elder of the church, you carry a level of authority in the church, specifically in this church, right?
Yeah.
Similar to how we talked about husbands and wives. A wife is not subject to somebody else's husband or another man. She's subject to her husband.
Yeah.
And the husband does not treat another woman the way he treats his wife.
Right.
Right. So when somebody walks in off the street, they're not necessarily under that authority. And I think it's too important that we think about what that means. Kind of like you've already said, God is the Father.
Yeah.
Right. When we talk about authority, we're talking about His delegated direction, power, or substance. Right. So like people don't come to God through you.
Right.
But the direction of this church is really being determined by that eldership group and Brandon as a senior pastor, right?
Yeah.
So I think there's something that we have to then say, and he gets into this here when he talks about those who are the younger men, those who are not elders. It's important to subject yourself to that, right? Now we benefit very much here in American churches that if we don't like the authority that you're wielding here, we'll just go to the church down the street.
And people often do.
Right. And people often do.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, that is not God's intention.
Right.
What you ought to be asking is, God, where should I be?
Yeah.
And then help me to submit to what's happening there. When I worked at a Bible college, and I was the assistant to the dean of men, and part of what we did was we oversaw the resident assistant program, and we had to execute a lot of different punishments and have a lot of different disciplinary conversations, right?
Yeah.
And I remember people would come in, and we were in Texas, and one of the rules was don't walk on the grass.
Okay.
You got wrote up for walking on the grass. You get an hour of time where you had to help serve the campus and go pick up trash or something like that.
Yeah.
And I remember people coming in and being like, this is such a stupid rule. This is so dumb.
Yeah.
This is so dumb. And I think it's dumb that you're making me do this. And it was really weird to me to hear people say that too, because I was like, aren't we Aren't we where we're supposed to be? and that's what I would ask them. I would say, so I would always go back to when somebody had a problem with that. I would say, did God call you to be here?
Yeah.
And 9 times out of 10, they said yes. There are a few people that would say no, you know, but like when they say, well, yeah, God called. So this is where God wanted you to be.
Right.
Okay. So did God call you here to convince me that I shouldn't punish you for disobeying the rules?
Yeah.
Or did he call you here to be obedient to these rules, to learn something in humility? Yeah. I'm not saying that when you leave here, you need to pass on God's sacred rule of never walking on the grass.
Yeah.
Because clearly that's not the case.
Yeah.
But you do need to have an understanding of authority.
Yeah. Yeah. And, you know, I mean, yeah, we've had, thankfully, we don't have a lot of discipline issues, but, you know, things have had come up or when something new happens and we have to make a decision on, okay, what direction do we go, you know? And so we'll be in meetings and Brandon says, okay, here's the situation. What do you think? And a lot of times something I have no idea, like, oh, geez, I don't have a clue, you know, and that's really have to pray, like, okay, God, what is the right thing to do here? And there's a lot of times when I think of something immediately, like, oh, well, we should do this. And then I have to think, I pause and say, like, okay, is that me or is that God telling me that, you know? And so anytime we make a decision and we have to share news or something with people that is hard, we always have to make sure that at the end of the day, like, we're doing this because this is God. You know, we don't. You know, one of the worst things that you can say as a dad, and I say this as a father of 2 kids who is an imperfect dad by many ways. One of the things I never try to say, and I'm pretty good about not doing it, is tell your kids to do something and they say why. You lose all credibility when you say, because I said so. Because, you know, that, you know, it doesn't, kids don't really respond to that well. Like, well,
right.
that's dumb. So just because you're my dad, you just want to say this, you know, but, you know, I don't tell my kids to not climb on the railing because I don't want to spoil their fun. Right. I don't want them to climb on the railing because I don't want them to, 1, break the railing, 2, break themselves when they fall off the railing, you know.
Right.
And so when we as elders of this church or shepherds of this flock, as the Bible puts it, when we say this is where we're going, this is the direction we're going, or we want to do this in our service, or we don't want to do this anymore, you know, it can't be because I said so. It was because this is what we've done. This is what we decided through prayer, and this is where we feel God is instructing us and leading us.
Yeah, and that's exactly what Peter's asking the elders to do here, is to say, you know, don't do it for your own purposes. Don't do it to put people under your thumb. You know, we talked a little bit about disciplinary things, but like that is often the negative side of authoritarianism that we look at.
Yeah.
And that's not typically what's going to be happening. There's not a lot of, it's a voluntary church.
Yeah.
There's not a lot of discipline that happens. But sometimes we do have to say, hey, this is how things are. So some behaviors either have to change or we need to rediscuss this relationship.
Right.
But it's typically more to what you were just saying. It's typically going to be more of, this is the direction we're going with the service. These are the things we're teaching in our Bible studies. We're going to allow Tim to start a podcast, and this is why.
Right. Yeah.
Regardless of what you think of him and his beard, you know. So yeah. And so. Anyway, we spent a lot of time on that, but but he then moves on to those who are younger and tells them to subject themselves again, and then he tells everyone to act. He says, "All of you clothe yourselves with humility toward one another." Mm-hmm. So again, those who are submitting to authority and those who are in positions of authority should always work in humility toward one another. Should always take on an air of humility and utilize humbleness. I know humility has been the key to all of my great successes.
Well done. Well done.
But then it gets us to that verse again, which is Proverbs 3:34. God opposes the proud and gives grace to the humble. So if you try to work and do things as unto the Lord, you're doing them in humility, and God is going to bless that because he's blessing his purposes. When you try to do them for your own purposes, he is going to be in opposition because you are not doing what he's doing. You are doing something else.
Yeah.
And here's the thing that I will tell everyone, never be in opposition of God.
Bad idea.
It's a bad idea.
Never worked out.
It's going to be a bad time.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I think that, a lot of times people kind of sometimes, and I was really guilty of this early on in my life, was not understanding the true definition of humility. Humility is not putting yourself down,
Right.
thinking lower of yourself. Oh, I'm no good. That's not humility. That's putting yourself down, which is
self-deprecation.
Yeah, which is not a good idea. Humility is putting others before you. Is knowing that you don't know the answer to everything. You may not be the smartest person in the room. But humbling yourselves before God is putting him before you and knowing that he is greater than you. You know. And it also comes down to service too. I mean, one of the, if you go backwards if we go back to when he's talking about not pursuing dishonest gain, but eager to serve. Mm-hmm. As an elder, my job is to serve. At the end of the day, serving, whether it be somebody new or somebody who is been here for 20 years, serving them so that they can serve the kingdom however God has created them to do, and helping put those people in places so that they can serve God. Finding people, somebody, there's oftentimes people will be in a place of, they might be in a ministry, they might be leading a ministry that they're not really doing real well at. And so, sometimes we have to say, all right, we want to change some things up, not because you're bad at this or you're you messed up or anything like that, but because we think you'd be better off here because this is where God's gifted you. You talk about, you've told us like, oh, this is your passion. This is the
right.
Are you doing this because you have to and because the position is open, or because you're passionate and you love it? It's like, well, and most of the time it's, well, I really want to be doing this, or this is really my passion. All right, then let's do that and find somebody else to do this.
Right.
Well,
you know what, though, I think we get back to that conversation about elders being domineering and like putting people in a box.
Right.
Oftentimes, churches are in such need of volunteers that they will, unfortunately, be a little manipulative and asking for those volunteers and talking about, well, you need to. Right. You need to be volunteering anywhere. You need to be doing something. And so people will feel like a sense of, not condemnation, but like a they'll start questioning themselves, like, am I doing enough?
Right.
Well, I need to do this. I need to volunteer for this. And then it turns out they're doing something that they really probably shouldn't be doing.
Yeah.
But they're doing it because it's needed. Now, look, there's something noble about volunteering when there's a need.
Yeah.
Doing something like that. But don't make a long-term commitment to a ministry.
For sure.
If that is not what you're equipped to do. Sure. And I know I've experienced this personally, and I don't know that it's like, I use words like manipulation and stuff. I don't think people always know that that's what they're doing.
Yeah.
I think sometimes they think that they're doing what's right, and I think maybe they're doing that. But I remember when I got out of Bible college, I had someone, a minister tell me very point blank, "You're a youth pastor. You need to be, pastoring youth."
Yeah.
Well, as it just so happened, their church needed a youth pastor.
Yeah.
Right. And I remember being very much like, I'm not a youth pastor though. I'm a minister, and I will minister to youth because I minister to anyone.
Yeah.
But don't put me don't put this like label on me that you're called to youth ministry.
Yeah.
That's another podcast for another time.
Right. Yeah.
But the point is, we who, if we are in a ministry, we should not be trying to conform somebody to fill a need that we think needs to be filled.
Right.
We need to trust God to bring the right person for those positions.
Yeah.
And then we need to not try to fill a position ourselves and say, well, there's a need there, so I'm going to go do that, even though I'm a square trying to fit in that circle.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, so.
Yeah.
Anyway, but to your point, this all comes back to humility, being able to say, I'm the wrong person for this.
Yep.
Or even being able to say, I'm the right person for this can be said in humility.
Yeah.
So those are things that we need to be considering as we serve the church.
Yeah, for sure.
All right, so then we get to verses 6 through 11, and this is where we get into humbling ourselves before God. So, verse 6, therefore, humble yourselves under the mighty hand of God, so that he may exalt you at the proper time, having cast all your anxiety on him, because he cares about you. Be of sober spirit, be on the alert. Your adversary, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion, seeking someone to devour. So resist him, firm in your faith, knowing that the same experiences of suffering are being accomplished by your brothers and sisters who are in the world. After you have suffered for a little while, the God of all grace, who called you to his eternal glory in Christ, will himself perfect, confirm, strengthen, and establish you. To him be dominion forever and ever. Amen. Okay, so humble yourself before God because he will exalt you. And here's the hard part: at the proper time.
Mm-hmm.
I think this is something that can be very challenging if you're pursuing a calling in Christ, is waiting for the appropriate time.
Yeah.
Patience
is not a natural thing that we have.
No, it's a fruit of the Spirit.
Yep.
And the more we lean in the Spirit, the more we can get that patience. But, don't be over eager to do something just because God called you to do it.
Mm-hmm.
Approach it with diligence of knowing that you're doing it unto him. So you want to do it right. You want to get it right.
Yeah. And on his timing.
Exactly.
Not yours. Because usually whatever God calls you to do, whether it be, a youth minister or whatever the case may be, whatever position you're in usually involves other people, And so sometimes, you may be ready to X, but this person over here is not ready for Y,
Yeah.
And so whether they be you need to join together or this person has to come out, you have to come in, or whatever the case may be. All of these things, everybody's God is directing everybody's life at once.
Yeah.
And whether we realize it or not, we're affecting other people's lives and we're affecting other people's walk. So God probably hasn't told you now because he's still doing things over here, whether it be with this person or this situation that has to be fixed before you come in and do whatever it is that God's calling you to do, because his timing is perfect and way better than ours.
Absolutely. 100%. So then we see here that we need to cast our anxieties on him. This is really the height of humility, right? Is giving these things to God. Is saying, I can't do this on my own, right? The world will tell you that you can. If you eat right, get good sleep, work out 3 times a week and take a few moments of mindfulness every week, then you too can live a joyous and successful life.
Yeah.
Right. Well, that's hogwash. Like all those things can be beneficial to your body.
Yeah.
All those things can be beneficial. The only thing that really gives you peace is God.
Yeah. And I think you're absolutely right in that sentence comes right after humbling yourself.
Yeah.
Because yes, it's humbling yourself is basically saying that you like you said, I can't do this on my own. I can't overcome this depression on my own. I can't do my job on my own, out of my own power. I can't be the best father or husband I can be because of how great a person I am. There's things that I am completely incapable of doing, and that's why I have to and that's why you give those to God. And I think that also goes into verse 8 here. Be alert and sober-minded. Your enemy, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion, like basically saying we can't defeat the devil on our own either.
Yeah.
And so we have to, be alert and know, when the enemy is at us or when the enemy is, trying to affect us, but also know that I can't beat a lion one-on-one.
Right.
I'm going to lose, and so also humbling yourselves in that, that fight against the enemy, that you can't win that on your own either.
Yeah. Well, what's that famous quote from that movie is, the greatest trick the devil ever pulled was convincing the world he doesn't exist.
Yeah.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something where here Peter, again, like as you just said, uses the word sober spirit again, and we need to be on guard. Satan does want to devour you, but we can resist him, and we can be firm in our faith, knowing that other people. So, like when I'm dealing with something, I know that Tommy also goes through things. Mm-hmm. I think this is something that we do, and this plays back into humility. Is we think that our struggles are so singular, mm-hmm. and that they are just things that we struggle with, and we're the ones who are experiencing this, and everyone else is living a picture perfect life.
Yeah,
and that's not the case. Everyone has hardship. Everyone has struggles. Everyone has things that they have to overcome in their life, and especially in our brotherhood of Christianity and being under Christ. I know that you're experiencing some of the same attacks of the enemy that I'm experiencing. Mm-hmm. And whether they're the same or they're not, they're for the same purpose, which is to dissuade us against Christ.
Yeah.
And again, this is, humbling ourselves to know that I'm not the only one experiencing this. Mm-hmm. And then going back to this unity that Peter and Paul have taught us is that we need to be together in community so that we can help each other through these things.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And that's I think that when God first created the world and he said it is not good for man to be alone, I think that obviously at that point he was talking about, man, and he needed a woman to be there with him.
Yeah.
But I think that phrase, it is not good for man to be alone, has many applications still now. I mean, there's no coincidence that our society, our country entered a mental health valley when we were told to all isolate and stay away from each other.
Right.
Yes, we are going to have some of the same issues, and as husbands, as wives. No, we're not wives. As husbands, as husbands, as fathers, as employees, as workers, as friends, we're going to have some of the same deal. But your issues are going to be a little bit different than mine because you have a different job than me. Uh-huh. Your kids are different than mine. Your wife is different than mine. And so while we can share in and so that's why it's important to share in that, because you've probably been through things because, you're a little older than me. So
just a touch. Yeah, just a touch.
No. I mean, and that's the reason why Paul talks about as elders and for the young to submit to the elders, because they've been through it.
Yeah.
I love meeting and talking with guys who are, 5-10 years older than me, because everything I'm going through now, they now may have gone through the exact same thing, but something close to it. And they, I need to humble myself and know that, hey, maybe they might have some good advice that they can give me. And then I don't know the answer to everything.
Might be some wisdom there, yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. All right. So then, so then he does pray for them a little bit here, but Peter points out that God will complete the work he started in them, right? So the God of all grace who called us to eternal glory in Christ, he's going to perfect, confirm, strengthen, and establish us, right? Mm-hmm. So again, this is more humility, is knowing that we don't perfect ourselves. We don't have confirmation in ourselves. We don't have strength in ourselves. We don't establish ourselves. Mm-hmm. Christ does that for us.
Yeah.
So lean into him, because it is he who has dominion forever and ever.
Yeah,
right.
For sure.
All right. So let's round this out. We got verses 12 through 14 here. Verse 12 says, "Through Silvanus, our faithful brother, for so I regard him, I have written to you briefly, exhorting and testifying that this is the true grace of God. Stand firm in it. She who is in Babylon, chosen together with you, sends you greetings, and so does my son Mark. Greet one another with a kiss of love. Peace be with you all who are in Christ." All right. So as we see here, Peter kind of says hey, this is his letter, but Silvanus is probably dictating it for him. He's writing it. Peter's speaking, Silvanus is writing it. And we talked about Paul doing this before. So this last bit is probably written by hand by Peter to just show that it is authentically him.
Yep.
Which again is something that Paul did. He mentions she who is in Babylon, and scholars say that this is a reference to the church in Rome. Babylon basically just being a broad term for being in the world, being in a worldly place, right? And then Peter also mentions his son Mark, and many believe that, and so this Mark we believe is John Mark.
Yeah.
And many believe that Mark used Peter as his primary source for the Gospel of Mark. So when we read the Gospel of Mark, what we're kind of seeing is Mark recounting things through Peter's eyes. Now, there's also some things that are mentioned that suggest that Mark was also around at that time. He was just much younger.
Yeah.
We'll get into those things at another time. But that is the end of 1 Peter chapter 5 and total all of 1 Peter.
Yeah, and I love one of the things I love about this is he says. So my version says Silas. I know there's Silvanus and Silas. They're sometimes interchangeable. Whom I regard as a faithful brother. They're not related, but he loves him like a brother. And then he refers to Mark as a son. Now, as far as we know, Mark is not biologically related to Peter,
right?
But he loves him and cares for him as a son. And that kind of goes back to that what we were just talking about a minute ago about being together and younger submitting to older, and that's we are called to be brothers. The older are called to be fathers to the young, and to look at each other as the family of God, whether we be biologically related or not.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, I think that does it. Unless you have any last thoughts.
I got it.
I think it's important. Again, I think one of the terms that came up over and over again, be of sober spirit.
Yep.
So if you're listening to this, if you're watching this, then let that be at least the one thing. Hopefully you take more from this conversation and from this reading, but take the things of the Spirit, take the things of God seriously, and really contemplate them, really focus on them, and really apply them to your life. That's what Peter is telling us to do. So hopefully everyone out there has gotten that.
For sure.
Now we'll leave this the way Peter did, which is to say, peace be to you all who are in Christ. I feel like I should say shalom.
Yeah, for sure. Right.